we come to the Torah portion of Yitro, which includes the revelation at Sinai, which is one of the three core mythological historical events of Judaism: creation, revelation, and redemption. These three events tie Jewish history from its very beginning to its very end, and it is anchored in revelation. But what is that revelation? What is it that's happening here? Is it God speaking from a mountain in a loud, booming voice? What actually is being revealed? Three modern philosophers, Franz Rosenzweig, Martin Buber, and Abraham Joshua Heschel, have similar but differing perspectives on this. For Martin Buber, revelation is the creation of an I-thou relationship between this very personal God of the Bible and between that community of Israelites, and then later with any Jews that follow. So for Buber, it's not the content of revelation that's important, it's the fact of revelation, it's the fact that God can reveal. And what that means for Buber, for Martin Buber, is that there's no law that is dictated from God to the Israelites, but rather that's how the Israelites heard the encounter and wrote it down, and then later generations interpreted it accordingly. So for Martin Buber, the essential part of revelation isn't the words on the page necessarily, isn't the mitzvot specifically, but the fact that God reveals. The fact that God can create not just an I-it connection which is distant, but an intimate I-thou connection with each one of us and with the community in general. So for Buber, it's the essence of revelation is connection. For Franz Rosenzweig, it's different. To quote Neil Gilman from his wondrous book, Sacred Fragments, for Rosenzweig, the content of revelation is simply the fact of revelation. God's entering into a unique relationship with Israel, which is similar but different to Buber. This is much more about a unique relationship with the people. And so Rosenzweig says the passage immediately before the Ten Commandments in Exodus 19 and 20, God came down onto Sinai. For Rosenzweig, that concludes the revelation. The passage God said, or God spoke, in Exodus chapter 20, verse 1, Rosenzweig says is the beginning of interpretation. And then after that, the first of the Ten Commandments, I am, from Exodus chapter 20, verse 2, Rosenzweig says that's totally interpretive. Torah, as Gilman says, Rosenzweig explains, Torah is Israel's classic response to the revelatory encounter, spelling out how Israel understood its relationship with God and how it determined to live its life in its unique status. So where Buber and Rosenzweig part company is over the relationship between revelation and Jewish law. They agree that law is not the content of revelation. Revelation, they both say, is never legislation. But Rosenzweig insists that the sense of being commanded is. God may not legislate, according to Rosenzweig, but God nonetheless commands. And the difference between law and command is that a law is impersonal and universal, whereas a command is personal and subjective. Laws are written in books, whereas commands are experienced. So Buber says that God does command. Rosenzweig says that God does command. Buber says none of that at all. Buber says it's just relationship. Rosenzweig says God does not legislate here, that's totally interpretation, but nonetheless, God does command. We feel what Rabbi Eli Tikvasera describes as compelling commitment once we're in relationship with God. And Abraham Joshua Heschel says something similar. As a report about revelation, the Bible itself is midrash. And we understand midrash as a later interpretation of biblical text. But according to Heschel, even the Bible itself is a human interpretation of some prior or more primal revelatory content that is beyond human comprehension. And so Heschel says that there are actually two things happening at Sinai: God's giving of the Torah and Israel's receiving of the Torah. And both were active in this encounter. And what emerges in Torah is colored both by its divine origin and by its human appropriation. So Heschel says also that Judaism reflects a minimum of revelation and a maximum of interpretation. And so he says the source of authority is not the word as given in the text, but is rather Israel's understanding of the text. And that's why I think Torah study is so important. That's why we have so many people come to our Torah study every week. Because it's not just what does the text say, take it and learn it, but what do we as a community understand this text says to us? Where do we find a difference between legislation and commandment? Do we feel commanded when we look at this revelation in this week's Torah portion? Is there a sense of being commanded? Is there a sense that it stirs something within us that tells us that we have to act in certain ways? And the idea for me, I think, partly for Torah study, is to take it from legislation and turn it into commandment. To say, because legislation, as I said before, is impersonal. It doesn't matter who it's being commanded to or legislated for. These are the universal commands, and whoever you are, regardless, you obey them. That's fine, but that doesn't stir the heart. It doesn't stir the soul. So I'm really quite moved by these 20th century theologians who turn this revelatory encounter from something potentially stale, in the sense of it's just written on a page and do it, to something much more personal and real. It's a much more mystical, perhaps, or personal interpretation of the text. And so I invite you to join us tomorrow as we look at Revelation through different midrashim. We're going to look at ancient midrashim, ancient commentaries, and more modern commentaries to try to explore what this revelatory encounter is. Is it a marking point in God's interference in the universe, creation, revelation, redemption, or is it actually about relationship? Is it about more than just God coming down from on high, telling us what to do, and then leaving? And so we're going to look at ancient midrashim and modern midrashim to explore this revelatory encounter and try to find how it moves us. I think it's going to be a really interesting Torah study. I hope you'll join us. As well, of course, as tonight's service, our Kabbalat Shabbat service, and our conservative service tomorrow morning. This service continues to grow. We have many people who come to it, not just from our community, but from other communities as well. And we really hope you'll be able to join us for that. It's a very different, interesting prayer experience, and it's very moving in a very different way. I hope you'll be able to join us throughout this Shabbat, and I wish you Shabbat Shalom.